The night of the funeral, around 11 at night, I stood in the garage, holding my suitcase, watching my daughter-in-law Courtney throw the last of my belongings onto the concrete floor. The dog, a golden retriever named Duke, whimpered in the corner. Courtney's face was cold, her voice cutting through the darkness. "From now on, you sleep with the dog." I said nothing about the $22 million and the oceanfront villa my husband Richard left me in his private will. I simply smiled, already planning how Courtney would pay for every cruel word. I made a bed on an old tarp in the garage, my hands shaking as I unfolded the musty fabric. Duke curled beside me, his warm body the only comfort in that cold space. The concrete floor was hard beneath me, and I could smell motor oil and old paint. This was my home now, apparently. Just hours ago, I had buried my husband of 42 years. The funeral had been beautiful, I suppose. Richard would have appreciated the turnout. His colleagues from the law firm, neighbors from our street, friends from the country club we rarely visited. Everyone had kind words about what a good man he was, how much he had accomplished. My son Brandon's eyes had been red and swollen. He could barely speak during his eulogy. And Courtney, well, she had performed grief beautifully. Tears at exactly the right moments, a trembling hand on Brandon's arm. The perfect picture of a devoted daughter-in-law mourning her beloved father-in-law. But I knew better. Richard had been a patent attorney, successful and meticulous. We had lived a comfortable upper-middle-class life in our 3-bedroom colonial house, the one we bought back in 1983 when Brandon was just a baby. Richard always handled the finances privately. I trusted him completely, never questioned where the money went or how much we had. That was just how we did things in our generation. He managed the business side of life, I managed the home. It worked for us. He died suddenly 2 days ago. A heart attack, the doctors said. He was 71, seemingly healthy, playing golf just the week before. One minute he was reading the newspaper at breakfast, the next he was clutching his chest. The ambulance came quickly, but it was already too late. My Richard was gone. Brandon had married Courtney 3 years ago after a whirlwind romance, 6 months from meeting to wedding. I had never liked her, something about the way she calculated every word, every gesture. But I stayed silent for Brandon's sake. He was happy, or seemed to be. Who was I to interfere? Since the wedding, Courtney had been pushing boundaries, little tests, using my good china without asking, rearranging furniture in the living room, making comments about how the house needed updating, always testing, always pushing to see what she could get away with. But I never imagined this. What Courtney did not know, what nobody except Richard's law partner Dorothy knew, was that Richard's final patent had sold for an enormous sum just before his death. $22 million, transferred into a private trust with my name on it. And the villa, a stunning property on the Oregon coast that Richard had purchased as a surprise for our retirement. We were supposed to move there next spring, grow old watching the Pacific Ocean from our deck. That dream died with him, but the villa remained. All mine, according to the private will kept at Dorothy's office. I could have told Courtney about it tonight. Could have watched her face crumble as she realized her cruelty was pointless, but something stopped me. Some instinct told me to wait, to watch, to see exactly how far she would go, because in my heart, I suspected Courtney had been planning something. The way she had inserted herself into Richard's life these past few months, the long conversations in his office, her sudden interest in his work. No dinner had been offered to me tonight. When I asked to use the bathroom, Courtney had actually laughed. "Use the gas station down the street," she had said. "This is my house now, and I decide who comes inside." Her house, not Brandon's house, not our family home, her house. She had even brought Brandon to the garage, made him see my new accommodations. My son had looked uncomfortable but said nothing. He was exhausted from grief, from making funeral arrangements, from holding himself together. Courtney had whispered something to him, and he had nodded slowly. "Your mother cannot stay in the main house anymore," she had told him loud enough for me to hear. "This is my home now." Brandon had not argued. I lay on that tarp, Duke's steady breathing beside me, and I thought about justice, about patience, about how sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone reveal their true nature. I could endure this. I had survived worse. 42 years of marriage taught you resilience, and I had a secret weapon that Courtney could not even imagine. Tomorrow, I would start planning. Tonight, I would rest and remember Richard. Remember the good man he was, the life we built together, the love that sustained us through decades. Courtney could take my physical comfort, but she could not take my memories or my dignity. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew, pale morning light was filtering through the grimy garage window. I sat up, my back aching from the hard floor. Duke was gone. Panic hit me immediately. I searched the garage frantically, calling his name softly. Duke had been Richard's beloved companion for 9 years. Where was he? I went to the house, knocked on the back door. Courtney opened it, blocking the entrance with her body. "Oh, I took Duke to the shelter this morning," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. "One less mouth to feed." My heart broke into pieces. Duke was all I had left of Richard. That dog had sat by Richard's chair every evening, had slept at the foot of our bed, had been there through every important moment of the past 9 years, and Courtney had just given him away like he was nothing. I drove to the animal shelter immediately, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. But when I got there, the staff checked their records carefully and shook their heads. No dog matching Duke's description had been brought in that morning. No golden retriever at all. Courtney had lied. But why? I drove back to the house, my mind racing. Brandon's car was gone. He must have left for work. I knew I should not, but I snuck around to the back of the house and peered through the window of Richard's home office. What I saw made my blood run cold. Courtney was inside, going through the filing cabinets frantically. Papers were everywhere, scattered across Richard's desk, covering the floor. She was searching for something specific, her movements desperate and focused. She pulled out folders, flipped through them quickly, tossed them aside. Opened drawers, felt along the backs for hidden compartments. This was not someone organizing a deceased person's affairs. This was someone hunting for treasure. I understood with chilling clarity. Courtney knew about money somewhere. She had heard something, seen something, suspected something. She was looking for the inheritance. She just did not know. I already knew exactly where it was. I watched for another 10 minutes as she searched. Then she found something. Richard's safety deposit box key, taped to the underside of a drawer. I saw her face light up with triumph as she held it up to the light. She tucked it into her pocket and began putting the office back in order, carefully replacing files, closing drawers. I backed away from the window quietly and returned to the garage. My mind was spinning with this new information. This was not just cruelty. This was calculated. Courtney was executing a plan, and I had just gotten a glimpse of it. 2 days later, Brandon woke me at dawn. I had been sleeping fitfully on the tarp, dreaming about Richard, about better times. My son's face appeared above me, and for a moment I felt relief. Maybe he had come to his senses. Maybe he was going to help me. But his expression was angry, transformed into something I barely recognized. "Mom, we need to talk about what you have been doing." I sat up, confused. "What do you mean?" "Courtney told me everything. About how you have been acting strangely, how you tried to break into the house at night." "I was looking for Duke," I said immediately. "She told me she took him to the shelter, but she lied. I was trying to find him." Brandon shook his head. "She said you would make excuses. Mom, she is trying to help organize Dad's affairs and you keep making these accusations. You are saying she is stealing from the family. That is a serious claim." "Because she is," I said, hearing the desperation in my own voice. "I saw her going through your father's office, Brandon. She was tearing the place apart looking for something." He sighed heavily. "She is helping me organize Dad's affairs." "That is what wives do. That is what family does. You are not thinking clearly." I tried to explain, tried to make him understand, but every word I spoke seemed to push him further away. He was exhausted, I could see that. Grief had carved lines in his young face that had not been there a week ago. He wanted peace, not conflict. He wanted his mother to be rational and calm, not frantic and accusatory. Then Courtney appeared in the garage doorway. "I offered her the guest room," she said softly, her voice full of false concern, but she refused. She said she wanted to be alone with her grief. I have been trying to respect her wishes. I stared at her, shocked by the blatant lie. Brandon looked at me, waiting for me to confirm or deny. But what could I say? It was my word against hers, and clearly Brandon believed his wife. After Brandon left for work, Courtney came back to the garage. This time her mask dropped completely. The concerned daughter-in-law vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I know Richard had money somewhere," she said flatly. "I have seen the bank statements, the mysterious transfers. You are going to tell me where he kept his important documents." "I do not know anything about investments," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Richard handled everything." Her eyes narrowed. "You are lying, but it does not matter. This house is in Brandon's name now. You have no rights here. You are living here by my grace, and that grace is running out." After she left, I called James, our family lawyer. He was the one who had handled our basic estate planning years ago. My hands shook as I dialed. James confirmed what Courtney had said. The house had been transferred to Brandon's name 2 years ago as part of Richard's estate planning strategy to avoid probate. The regular bank accounts were frozen pending probate proceedings. And James knew nothing about any secret inheritance. Why would he? Richard had kept that private, handled through Dorothy's firm for exactly this reason. I realized, with growing horror, that legally, I was living in my son's house, with no financial resources of my own. My personal savings account had only $3,000. I had let Richard handle everything, trusted him completely. Now that trust left me vulnerable. I returned to the garage, my legs weak. This could not be happening. But when I opened the door, Courtney was waiting there with a manila folder in her hands. "Looking for these?" she asked with a smile. Inside the folder were documents with my signature, a quitclaim deed signing away any rights to the house, a statement saying I wished to live independently and refused family financial support, a medical power of attorney giving Brandon guardianship over my health decisions. I had never signed any of these papers. They were forgeries, but they looked perfect. My signature was exact, down to the little loop I always made on the M in Michelle. "Your husband taught me a lot about documents before he died," Courtney said, her voice soft and poisonous. "We spent a lot of time together in his office." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Was she suggesting she had an affair with Richard? My stomach turned. I tried to grab the documents, but she pulled them away easily. "These are just copies," she said. "The originals are already filed with my lawyer. And there is something else you should know. I am pregnant. Brandon is thrilled. He will believe anything I say now to protect his child. You are nothing but an obstacle, and obstacles get removed." Pregnant. Brandon's child. My grandchild. If that was even true. But how could I question it? If I accused her of lying about a pregnancy, I would look even more unstable, more vindictive. I heard Brandon's car pull into the driveway. Courtney's face transformed instantly into joy and excitement. She ran from the garage. I heard her voice, bright and happy. "Brandon, I have news." Amazing news. I heard his response, confused at first, then elated. "Really? Are you sure?" "Oh my God, Courtney, this is wonderful. Exactly what we need right now. Some hope, some joy." They went inside the house. I stood alone in the garage, feeling the walls close in around me. Courtney had thought of everything: forged documents, a fake pregnancy, the perfect manipulation of my grieving son, and the implied affair with Richard, poisoning my memories of my husband. I had no legal standing, no money, no proof of anything. And now, with a grandchild supposedly on the way, I had even less leverage. What kind of grandmother accuses the mother of her grandchild of fraud? Brandon would never forgive me. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Richard, about whether he really had spent time alone with Courtney. Had he been so blind? Or had she invented that story just to hurt me? I would never know the truth now. Richard was gone, and with him, any answers. Duke's absence made the garage feel even emptier. I missed his warm presence, his quiet companionship. Where was he? Was he scared? Did he miss us? I had to do something. I could not just accept this. But what? Every move I made seemed to play into Courtney's hands. 3 days later, I was living on granola bars and water from the gas station bathroom. My $3,000 was dwindling fast. I had to act. Sitting in the garage accepting defeat was not who I was. Richard would want me to fight. I found Dorothy at the law firm. She was 68 years old, sharp-minded and fierce. She had been Richard's law partner for 30 years, his closest friend outside of our marriage. When I walked into her office, her face filled with concern. "Michelle, what has happened to you? You look terrible." I poured out the whole story: the garage, the forged documents, the threats, Courtney's search through Richard's office, the fake pregnancy claim, everything. Dorothy's face grew darker with each detail. When I finished, she opened her desk drawer and pulled out a thick file. "Michelle, Richard left you everything in a separate trust. The house might be Brandon's, but you have the villa and the investments. You are a wealthy woman. You do not have to live like this." She showed me the documents. There it was, in Richard's careful handwriting and legal language. A trust with my name, established 6 months before his death. The villa deed, bank statements showing $22 million. I was not destitute. I was rich. "We can reveal this immediately," Dorothy said firmly. "Get you out of that garage today." But I stopped her. If I just took the money and left, Courtney would get away with everything. The forgeries, the manipulation, whatever else she had planned. I wanted justice, not just escape. I wanted Courtney exposed for what she really was. Dorothy warned me this was dangerous, that Courtney was clearly unstable and calculating, but she agreed to wait. She would keep the trust documents safe, while I gathered evidence of Courtney's fraud. I went to the house while Courtney was out shopping. I knew this was risky, but I had to find proof. The forged documents, evidence of her schemes, something concrete that would make Brandon believe me. I found Courtney's phone in the bedroom, left charging on the nightstand. My hands shook as I picked it up. No password, surprisingly. Or maybe she was just that confident. The text messages made me feel sick. To an unknown number. "The old woman does not know anything. But keep looking at the law firm." Another text. "Brandon believes everything. The pregnancy test worked perfectly." The pregnancy was fake. I had been right. I grabbed an old camera I found in the closet and started taking photos of the phone screen, documenting everything. I did not hear the front door open. Did not hear Courtney come home early. The first thing I knew was her voice behind me. "What are you doing with my phone?" I spun around. She was standing in the doorway, and her face was calm. Too calm. She pulled out her own phone and dialed. "Yes, police?" "There is an intruder in my home." I tried to explain. "This is not an intrusion. This is my house. Well, my son's house. I live here." But Courtney was ready. She showed the police officers the forged documents when they arrived. Showed them proof that I had chosen to live independently, that I had no legal residence in the house. She performed beautifully, tears streaming down her face as she explained how worried she was about me. "She has been acting so strange since my father-in-law died," she told the officers. "I am worried about her mental state. She keeps making these wild accusations. And now breaking in, going through my personal things." When Brandon arrived, called by Courtney, his face was a mixture of fury and fear. "Mom, what are you doing? Why were you in our bedroom?" I tried to tell him about the texts, about the proof I had found, but when I reached for the camera, it was gone. Courtney must have taken it during the confusion. The evidence had vanished. The police did not arrest me, but they gave me a trespassing warning. One officer looked at me with pity. "Ma'am, if you are having trouble with grief or confusion, there are resources that can help. Please do not come back to this house without permission." That incident was exactly what Courtney needed. Within 2 days, she filed for a restraining order. The petition claimed I was becoming dangerous and unstable with grief. She provided evidence. The break-in. My accusations about her faking the pregnancy. The trespassing warning from the police. The neighbors who had apparently witnessed my strange behavior. The judge granted a temporary restraining order. I could not come within 500 feet of the house. I was officially homeless. Dorothy let me stay in the law firm's conference room temporarily, sleeping on the sofa. But she was worried. "Michelle, if Courtney portrays you as unstable, she could challenge the trust. could claim you are not competent to manage assets, could argue for guardianship. I realized my plan to gather evidence had backfired spectacularly. Every action I took, Courtney twisted into proof of my mental decline. I was not investigating her crimes, I was demonstrating my own instability. At least, that was how it looked to everyone else. 1 week after the restraining order, I received court papers delivered to the law firm. Courtney had filed for emergency guardianship. The petition claimed I was a danger to myself and others. It cited dementia and grief-induced psychosis. It requested that Brandon be appointed as my legal guardian, with the authority to make all decisions about my health, my finances, and my living arrangements. If this went through, I would lose everything. My freedom, my money, my future. Courtney would control it all through Brandon. 1 week later, I sat in the office of Dr. Helen Brennan, a court-appointed psychiatrist. The walls were a neutral beige, the furniture carefully non-threatening. Dr. Brennan was professional, in her 50s, with kind eyes that still held a measure of skepticism. This was the competency evaluation that would determine whether I needed a guardian. She asked me standard questions at first. Did I know where I was? What day it was? Who was the president? I answered everything correctly, calmly. I was determined to prove my sanity. Then she moved to more pointed questions. Tell me about your relationship with your daughter-in-law. I chose my words carefully. We have had some conflicts since my husband's death. Your daughter-in-law claims you have been making accusations. That you believe your husband left you millions of dollars and a villa, but there is no record of these assets. This was the trap. If I insisted the money existed, I sounded delusional. If I denied it, I lost my only leverage. My husband did leave me those assets, I said steadily. They are held in a private trust managed by his law partner, Dorothy Martin. The documents are real and properly notarized. Dr. Brennan made notes. We will need to see those documents. I had asked Dorothy to bring the complete file to the evaluation. She arrived with everything, the trust documents, the villa deed, the bank statements, all of it real, legal, and properly executed. For a moment, I felt hope. This was proof, concrete, undeniable proof, that I was not delusional. But Courtney's lawyer was ready with a countermove. They brought in a handwriting expert who testified that Richard's signature on the trust documents appeared inconsistent with his known signature patterns. They suggested the documents were sophisticated forgeries. They implied that I, desperate and grieving, had paid someone to create these papers to maintain my dignity after discovering Richard had left everything to Brandon. Courtney testified with tears in her eyes. She started talking about this mystery money right after Richard died. I think she could not face that Richard left everything to Brandon. She has created this fantasy to cope with her grief and her anger at me. Then, they presented my pattern of delusional behavior, the break-in, the trespassing incident, the accusations that Courtney had faked her pregnancy. They had medical records showing Courtney was indeed pregnant, confirmed by a Dr. Sarah Westwood, ultrasound images, blood test results. Everything looked legitimate. Most damaging were the witnesses. Neighbors testified they had heard me talking to myself in the garage. I was talking to Duke before he disappeared, but they made it sound like I was having conversations with imaginary people. They said they saw me wandering the streets at odd hours. I was walking to the gas station for bathroom access, but in their telling, I was a confused elderly woman lost in her own neighborhood. Courtney had been building this case for weeks. Every cruel action had been calculated to provoke reactions she could use as evidence. Dr. Brennan's expression grew more concerned as the testimony continued. After the hearing, she told me her report would be inconclusive, recommending further evaluation. She could not definitively say I was incompetent, but she could not rule it out either. Outside the courthouse, I finally got Brandon alone for a moment. He looked exhausted, torn between loyalty to his wife and his mother. Mom, I do not know what to believe anymore. Courtney showed me texts between you and some lawyer talking about handling her. Were you trying to get rid of her? I never sent any texts like that. But he pulled out his phone and showed me. There were text messages, apparently from my old phone number, discussing plans to force Courtney out of the house, to prove she was an unfit mother. Vicious, calculated messages, I had never sent them. But Courtney had access to my old phone. She had been in the house, could have sent texts from my number easily. And Mom, he continued, his voice breaking. The baby's heartbeat. I heard it. Courtney is really pregnant. Why would you claim she is lying about that? If Courtney had medical records, what could I say? That they were forged? That made me sound even more paranoid, more delusional. If the judge says you need help, Brandon said quietly, maybe you should accept it. Maybe grief has changed you. Those words cut deeper than anything else. My own son thought I had lost my mind. I returned to Dorothy's office to find her packing files. Her face was pale, angry. Michelle, I have to tell you something. Courtney's lawyer contacted our firm's ethics board. They are investigating whether I helped you forge the trust documents. I am under review. I cannot represent you anymore. I am so sorry. I stood there, numb. Without Dorothy, I had no legal representation. Without her testimony, the trust documents looked suspicious. I was alone, facing a guardianship hearing in 3 days, with no lawyer and no credible witnesses. That night, I used the last of my money to rent a room at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. The room smelled like cigarette smoke and desperation. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and tried to think of any way out. Courtney had won every round. She had isolated me, destroyed my credibility, turned my son against me, and positioned herself to take control of everything. In 3 days, a judge would likely grant her guardianship through Brandon. I would lose my freedom, my money, possibly even be institutionalized. Richard's face came to my mind. What would he tell me to do? Fight, probably. Richard never gave up, but he had never faced something like this, never been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. I fell asleep finally, sometime after 3 a.m, and in my dreams, I was back in the garage with Duke, feeling his warm fur, hearing his gentle breathing. It was the only peace I could find. 2 days later, one day before the guardianship hearing, I had not slept properly. My mind kept racing through scenarios, looking for any crack in Courtney's armor. I found nothing. She had been too thorough, too careful. A knock on the motel door startled me. I opened it cautiously to find Frank, my next-door neighbor from the old house. He was 73, a retired postal worker with kind eyes and a steady presence. Mrs. Brennan, I need to tell you something. I have been watching what has been happening, and it is not right. I invited him in. Frank explained that he had witnessed things. He saw Courtney throwing my belongings into the garage that first night. He saw her take Duke away in her car, headed toward the highway, not toward any shelter. He had heard Courtney on her phone, standing in her backyard, talking about playing the long game and getting rid of the old woman. Frank said he would testify at the hearing. He would tell the judge what he saw, what he heard. Finally, I had an ally, a witness who could expose at least some of Courtney's lies. We agreed to meet the next morning. I would drive him to the courthouse. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small spark of hope. That hope died the next morning when I arrived at Frank's house. His daughter Nancy answered the door, her face angry and protective. Stay away from my father. I do not know what you said to him, but he was upset all night. I just need to speak with him for a moment. He offered to help me with something important. Nancy's expression hardened. My father has moderate dementia. He gets confused about what he sees and hears. That woman, Courtney, she came by last night. She explained everything. How you have been trying to manipulate Dad, use his memory problems to create false testimony against her. She was so kind about it, worried about both of you. My stomach dropped. Courtney had gotten to Frank. Had convinced his daughter that he was unreliable, that I was exploiting him. Dad cannot testify for you. He does not remember half of what he sees. His doctor says stress makes his confusion worse. Courtney already spoke to the court about this. They know you tried to coach a vulnerable elderly man. I asked to see Frank, but Nancy refused. Just as she was closing the door, I caught a glimpse of Frank sitting in his chair in the living room. For a moment, our eyes met. His were clear, lucid. He mouthed 2 words, I am sorry. Then, Nancy blocked my view and shut the door firmly. I drove to the courthouse alone. My one witness had been neutralized. Worse, Now I looked like someone who would exploit an elderly man with dementia to support my delusions. The hearing was in a small courtroom, formal and intimidating. I represented myself since Dorothy could not help me. Courtney had a full legal team, 3 lawyers in expensive suits. The imbalance was obvious to everyone. I tried to present my case. I explained about the trust, about the villa, about the money Richard left me. But without Dorothy to authenticate the documents, the judge was skeptical. The handwriting expert's analysis had planted doubt. The documents looked like forgeries, even though they were real. Courtney's lawyers systematically destroyed what little credibility I had left. They presented Dr. Brennan's inconclusive psychiatric report. The forged documents with my signature, the neighbor's testimony about my strange behavior, the break-in and trespassing incident, the pregnancy medical records from Dr. Westwood, Brandon's tearful testimony about how his mother had changed since his father's death, how she made wild accusations and could not accept reality. I tried to fight back. I accused Courtney directly of forgery, fraud, faking the pregnancy, but I sounded desperate. My voice was too loud, my words tumbling over each other. I looked exactly like what they claimed I was. An unstable woman unable to cope with grief. Courtney remained calm throughout, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She testified in a soft, pained voice. "Your Honor, I love my mother-in-law. This is grief speaking. I just want her to get the help she needs. My baby deserves a healthy grandmother." The judge was clearly leaning toward ordering guardianship. I could see it in his expression, in the way he looked at me with pity rather than respect. Then something unexpected happened. The judge was reviewing the medical records confirming Courtney's pregnancy. He paused, his brow furrowing. He looked up at Courtney's lawyer. "These records are from Dr. Sarah Westwood, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." The judge pulled out his computer, typed something. His expression changed. Dr. Westwood's medical license was suspended 3 months ago for falsifying medical records. The courtroom went silent. Courtney's lawyer looked stunned. This was clearly news to him. Courtney herself went pale, her confident mask cracking. The judge looked at the medical records again, then at Courtney. "Are these records legitimate?" "Of course," Courtney said quickly. "I did not know about Dr. Westwood's suspension. I was a patient before that happened. But the seed of doubt had been planted. If the pregnancy records were fake, what else was fake? The judge made his decision. The hearing is postponed for 2 weeks. The pregnancy records will be investigated thoroughly. Mrs. Brennan will undergo a full psychological evaluation at County Hospital. Temporary guardianship is not granted at this time. However, Mrs. Brennan must check in with a court monitor daily to ensure her safety and well-being. The restraining order remains in effect. It was not a victory, but it was not a complete loss either. I had 2 weeks. 2 weeks to find real evidence, to expose Courtney's lies, to save myself. Outside the courthouse, Courtney was furious. I saw her pulling Brandon away quickly, but I heard her hissing at him. "She almost ruined everything. We need to move faster." Move faster. What did that mean? What was Courtney planning next? I checked into the county hospital for the psychological evaluation. The doctors there were thorough but fair. After 3 days of tests and interviews, they declared me completely competent. No signs of dementia. No psychosis. Grief, yes. Stress, absolutely. But my mind was sound. It should have been good news. But that night, lying in the hospital bed, I received a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging into my past or Brandon will have an accident. You would not want to lose your son, too." The threat was clear. Courtney knew I was investigating, and she was willing to hurt Brandon to stop me. My son, my only child. I could not let anything happen to him. But I also could not stop now, because if I did not expose Courtney, she would destroy all of us, eventually. 1 week later, I had been released from the hospital with a clean psychological evaluation. The doctors found me completely competent, rational, and clear-minded. This should have strengthened my case, but the threat against Brandon haunted every moment. I sat in the motel room, staring at that text message. "Stop digging into my past, or Brandon will have an accident." Courtney had proven she was ruthless. The threat was real. I believed she would hurt my son. I made a decision. I would withdraw all claims, accept guardianship if necessary, let Courtney win. Brandon's safety was more important than justice, more important than money, more important than my freedom. He was my child. I would sacrifice everything to keep him safe. But before I could call the court, Courtney made her own move. She filed new papers to have herself appointed as my guardian through Brandon. She claimed my competency evaluation had been influenced by my manipulation of the hospital staff. She produced more evidence of my supposed instability. She began the legal process to access any assets I might have, still searching for Richard's mysterious inheritance. Brandon was starting to see cracks in Courtney's facade. I could tell from his few, brief phone calls. He sounded confused, doubtful. The pregnancy that never seemed to progress beyond the first trimester. Courtney's obsession with my finances. Her controlling behavior. He was beginning to question things. One night, he confronted her about the Arizona marriage. I do not know how he found out about it. Maybe he finally started investigating on his own. Courtney had an explanation ready. An abusive ex-husband. She fled for her safety. His children had lied about her in court. She was the victim of a terrible situation. Brandon wanted to believe her. I could hear it in his voice when he told me about it. But doubt had taken root. Then everything changed. A woman named Patricia arrived at my motel room. She was 47 years old, well-dressed in a business suit, carrying a leather file folder. Her eyes were sharp and determined. "Mrs. Brennan, I am Patricia Hampton. Gerald Hampton was my father. I have been tracking Courtney for 18 months. She sat down and told me a story that made my blood run cold. Courtney had married her father when he was 72 years old, a recent widower. She isolated him from his family systematically. Convinced him to change his will, leaving everything to her instead of his children. Gerald died 6 months later. Officially, a heart attack. But Patricia suspected poisoning. She could never prove it. By the time they thought to test for toxins, Gerald had been cremated per Courtney's quick arrangements. Courtney disappeared with $300,000 before the will could be properly contested. The family tried to track her, but she vanished completely. Changed her name, moved across the country. Patricia had hired investigators. She finally traced Courtney to this area, watched her target Brandon at Richard's law firm, where Brandon worked part-time as an IT consultant. She believed Courtney had researched Richard, learned about his assets, and specifically seduced Brandon to gain access to the family wealth. More terrifying, Patricia had circumstantial evidence that Courtney might have poisoned Richard too, the slow-acting kind that mimics heart disease. She had been close to Richard for months before his death, spending time in his office, bringing him coffee and lunch. "Your husband's heart attack might not have been natural," Patricia said quietly. "I think she killed him to speed up her timeline." Richard. Murdered. The room spun around me, Patricia continued. She had hired a private investigator who had been following Courtney. They discovered she met regularly with a man named Troy Sellers. He had a criminal record. Fraud, extortion, identity theft. They were partners in this scheme. Patricia showed me surveillance photos. Courtney and Troy in a coffee shop, their heads close together. Troy handing Courtney something that looked like documents. The two of them laughing, relaxed, clearly intimate. Patricia needed proof of current crimes to go to the police. Past circumstantial evidence was not enough. She wanted to work with me to expose Courtney. Together, we formed a plan. A risky, dangerous plan. I would wear a wire and confront Courtney, try to get her to confess on tape. Patricia warned me repeatedly that this was dangerous. Courtney had already threatened Brandon. If she suspected a trap, she might follow through on that threat, but I could not see another way. We needed evidence, and this was our chance to get it. 2 days later, I waited outside the house, violating the restraining order. My heart pounded as I watched for Courtney. Brandon's car left for work right on schedule. I gave it 15 minutes, then approached the front door. Courtney opened it, her face shifting from surprise to fury. "You are violating the restraining order. I can have you arrested right now." "I know about Gerald Hampton," I said clearly, knowing the wire was recording every word. "I know about Arizona. I know about your partner, Troy Sellers." Her face changed. The fury disappeared, replaced by calculation. She looked at me carefully, assessing the situation. Then she smiled. "You cannot prove anything." "Did you kill Richard?" I pushed harder. "Is that how you knew about his assets? Did you poison him?" She laughed. Actually laughed. Richard was so easy. A little powder in his evening whiskey for weeks. It weakened his heart gradually. When he finally had the heart attack, the doctors never suspected. Natural causes, they said. Just another elderly man with heart disease. I had her. The confession was on tape. We had won. But then Courtney pulled out her phone. She turned it toward me, showing me the screen. It was a live video feed, Brandon, tied to a chair in what looked like a warehouse. Troy stood behind him, holding a gun to his head. "Did you really think I would not know you were recording? Troy has been following you for days." My horror must have shown on my face. She had anticipated everything. Again. "Here is what is going to happen," Courtney said calmly. "You are going to sign everything over to me. The villa, the money, whatever Richard left you. Then you are going to disappear. Maybe a grief-stricken suicide. Very tragic. Very believable given your recent mental health issues." She pulled the wire from under my shirt, ripped it off, crushed it under her heel. "Now let us go to your lawyer's office. You are going to transfer everything to Brandon, which means to me." I had no choice. Brandon's life hung in the balance. I got into her car, my mind racing. How could I save him? How could I stop this? But as Courtney drove, I noticed something. Across the street, in a parked sedan, I saw Patricia. She held up her phone and pointed to her ear. She had been recording with a directional microphone. The wire I wore had been a decoy. Patricia had the confession. She had evidence of Brandon's kidnapping. She was already calling the police. I just needed to stall. We drove to Dorothy's office. Courtney kept up a steady stream of threats. What she would do to Brandon if I did not cooperate. How she would make it look like I had caused his death. How she would make me watch before she killed me too. I agreed to everything. Kept her talking. Kept her distracted. When we arrived at the law office, police cars were already there. Courtney saw them too late. She tried to run, but officers grabbed her immediately. She screamed, fought, finally showing her true nature to the world. Patricia had given the police the recording. They had raided the warehouse using the background details visible in Troy's video. Brandon was safe. Troy was in custody. It was over. The recordings proved everything. Courtney's confession to poisoning Richard, the kidnapping, the fraud, the conspiracy with Troy. Both of them were arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, fraud, and a dozen other crimes. Dorothy's ethics investigation was immediately dropped. The trust documents were validated by independent experts. The handwriting analysis that claimed Richard's signature was forged turned out to be from an expert Troy had paid off. Real analysis confirmed the documents were genuine. I was awarded the villa and the full $22 million inheritance. The court apologized for the months of torment. The restraining order was lifted. The guardianship petition was dismissed with prejudice. Brandon was devastated but alive. He came to me in the courthouse, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I am so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have protected you. Can you ever forgive me?" I held my son and cried with him. Courtney had manipulated him expertly, used his grief and his love against him. He was a victim too. Of course I forgave him. He was my child. Love does not stop because of mistakes. We found Duke at Courtney's mother's house in Idaho. That woman had known nothing about her daughter's crimes, was horrified when the police arrived. Duke was older, grayer, but his tail wagged frantically when he saw me. We were reunited, finally. Brandon helped me move to the oceanfront villa, the place Richard had bought for our retirement. It was beautiful, perched on cliffs overlooking the Pacific. Exactly what Richard would have wanted. My son visited every week. We rebuilt our relationship slowly, honestly. We talked about Courtney, about Richard, about grief and guilt and healing. It was painful work, but necessary. Brandon was in therapy, processing the trauma of being married to a murderer, of nearly losing his mother. Courtney and Troy faced trial 6 months later. The evidence was overwhelming. Security footage from the warehouse, the recordings of Courtney's confession, financial records showing the money they stole from Gerald Hampton, forensic evidence that Richard had been poisoned with a slow-acting toxin that mimicked heart disease. They were both convicted. Courtney received life in prison without parole for murder, kidnapping, and fraud. Troy received 40 years. Justice, finally. I learned so much through this nightmare. I learned that silence and patience can be weapons. That sometimes appearing weak allows you to see your enemy's true nature. I learned to trust my instincts even when everyone doubted me. I learned that love makes us vulnerable, but it also makes us strong. Most importantly, I learned that I was far more resilient than I ever knew. 42 years of marriage had taught me many things, but this crucible taught me about my own strength, about survival, about justice. I forgave Brandon completely. He had been manipulated by someone who made manipulation an art form. Love is not weakness, even when it is used against us. And Brandon's love for me eventually helped save both of us. Now I stand on the villa's deck every morning, watching the Pacific Ocean, Duke at my side. The water stretches endlessly before me, powerful and eternal. I am at peace. The nightmare is over. My freedom is restored. My son is healing. My dignity has returned. Richard's dream for us came true, even if he could not be here to share it. I like to think he knows somehow, that he is at rest now, knowing I kept our family safe, that justice prevailed, that his legacy was protected. Sometimes at sunset, when the light turns golden across the water, I whisper to the wind, "I did it, Richard. I fought back, and I won. I kept our family safe." And I smile. Not the calculated smile I gave Courtney that first night in the garage, a real smile. The smile of someone who faced darkness and emerged into light, who lost everything and found herself, who discovered that even at 67 years old, even after 42 years of letting someone else lead, she was strong enough to fight back and win. This is my home now, my sanctuary, my hard-won peace. And every morning when I wake up, I am grateful. For the sunrise, for Duke's warm presence, for Brandon's weekly visits, for the strength I found when I needed it most, for the justice that finally came. I am Michelle. I survived. I fought. I won. And I am finally, truly home. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever faced a situation where someone tried to make you question your own sanity, your own truth? Have you ever had to stand alone when everyone believed someone else's lies? How did you find the strength to keep going? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who is facing their own battle right now. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like. Subscribe to hear more stories about resilience, justice, and the strength we find in our darkest moments. And share this with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to fight back, to reclaim your truth, to stand up for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that you are stronger than you know, that patience and truth are powerful weapons, that justice may take time, but it is worth fighting for. May you always have the courage to trust yourself, even when others doubt you. May you find strength in your darkest hours, and may you never forget that it is never too late to rewrite your story.